The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Loeb.
Good morning. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Ask a Rabbi on Digital 1590 WPSL. Please give me a call at 772-340-1590, 1590. So, welcome today. So, you were talking about speech and debate. And I was thinking all the way here about my topic, which was celebrating becoming a bar or bat mitzvah.
That's a speech?
That is. Well, there's a couple of speeches
Sometimes
involved
a
in
debate.
That. Well, there's often a debate between the rabbi and the family and the student. Right. So what is a bar or bat mitzvah celebration? It's something that happens at puberty at 12 to 13 years of age. A little bit different communities do it slightly differently. Yeah, easy for me to say on the radio. There's
Strike that from the record. Rephrase.
There are some different. Talmud says that a boy must be 12 years and a day, at least, typically 13, and a girl 11 years and a day. Recognizing that young girls tend to mature a little bit faster than young boys. And, you know, so that begs the question of how much of that's nurture and how much of that's nature. That old nature-nurture question, which always comes into play whenever you see gender differences cited anywhere.
Oh, I just think men in general are 16 and holding.
I'm not. Having known a fair share of women, there may not be any different.
Yeah.
Right. So
18 and holding.
18 and holding. There you go. Right. Got to have that little edge. And so it's a puberty rite. It's a rite of passage. It's a ritual, but it's got a lot of significance to it because in Hebrew, when you hear the word b'nai, like in b'nai brith, excuse me, or b'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, it does mean children. It does mean son or daughter of, but it also means a member of. Like b'nai brith is a member of the covenant. So it's referring to things like that. And so it might mean that you're the child of, but it also might just mean that you're a member of a community. So a bar or a bat mitzvah, and bar is Aramaic and bat is Hebrew. Well, it's also Aramaic. So, and that simply refers to coming of age. But the fact that the name is in Aramaic also tells us that the ritual came into play during the Talmudic period. So that's when it became much more formalized. And, what does it mean? It means that you're now old enough to know right from wrong. You're no longer 100% your parents' responsibility as far as right and wrong. And it also implies that you're going to now start to take care and start to take charge of your own education, that you now know enough to know that you don't know everything. And there are some communities who say, well, we need to push that way out, 15, 16, maybe even 17, 18, before a child begins to realize.
But if you really look at it, you have a complete influence on your child. They start to pull away from you. They start trust your opinion less. Right around 10 years old, they start to come into their own, argue with you more. They're not, cute and cuddly when they're 4.
That process started when you cut the umbilical cord.
But they do change,
Yeah.
and even rock and roll says you got to educate by 10.
Well, and there's a lot of developmental reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When a child is born, they do not have much of a prefrontal cortex, which is where we have what we call executive function, the ability to make.
But during that time, the body's growing.
The body the body starts growing, from when you were a cell. It starts to grow. And developing the higher brain functions does not happen until very, very late. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why young adults are still so very young, because they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, right? That's what the professor of psychology says. Blah, 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 blah. But that, like I said, it impacts executive decision making. And the idea of a bar or bat mitzvah is that this is the beginning of the process of developing that part of your brain. And so, you're no longer on mom or dad's coattails. You now know enough to stand up on your own. It does not begin to mean that you're an adult. It does not mean you're ready to get married. Talmud says marriage age 20, 21, 22. So they don't expect you to get married as a young teenager, but they do expect you to start to contribute to the community, to your family, and start to be a contributing member instead of just a growing child. Not that a child can't do things, and certainly many children give many beautiful gifts to the community and to their families, but as a child becomes a bar or bat mitzvah, and that's something they stay from then on, right? So Stuart is still a bar mitzvah because he's over 13. I know by a day or two. A few times over, right?
Hi.
Hi, how are you? And shalom, everyone who's saying hi on there.
Times 4 plus a couple of years.
Oh, okay. And sometimes people have a second or even a third bar mitzvah celebration to reaffirm. Well, not at the level that you took your son's
I
celebration.
tried to be cheap. It didn't work out that way.
Not when you... Never mind. There were a few choices you made that predestined that to be expensive.
You mean like the Mets cake?
Yes, the Mets cake would be one of them. The large hall would be another one. So those were all very costly decisions. And I'm thrilled that you could do that and that it worked for you and your family.
Now, was that dad spending or son spending?
That was dad spending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you can't really complain.
I can when I realize what it all added up to.
Counselor, you are an adult and should have known.
Wait, no. I object. I had never thrown a party in my life, and I could not be expected to throw my very first major party and know how to do everything inexpensively.
At least you weren't competing in New York, because they actually get competitive, and to me that's in a way very sad because it doesn't set the right example for the child. But what we consider as majorly over the top by New York standards wouldn't be, just because we're
on that point. Let me
Treasure
interject
Caost.
one thing.
Yeah.
What I remember about Aaron's bar mitzvah
celebration.
is not the party.
Good.
I remember the services.
That's encouraging.
Don't plan any weddings because those get really expensive.
Hopefully by then I'll have a feminine influence.
Very, very often, especially in the Northeast and in California, the cost of a bar bat mitzvah celebration can start to compete with a wedding just because of how flamboyant celebrations get in those geographic regions. It's just what is. I would venture a guess that would be true the further south you go in Florida as well. That the cost probably starts to go up. And but you're right. The service should be the star point of it. It should be the highlight, because that's really what it's about. It's about demonstrating to yourself and to the community that yes, you have had enough training, that you can stand up and participate in a discussion in a meaningful way, contribute to things. And that's what, I was really surprised. One of the young ladies who went through a bat mitzvah training with me actually vocalized that about 6 months before her celebration. She said, we were sitting at a table and she looked at me and she said, I get it. This is for me to know that I can do this. And I said, wow, because usually kids don't get it until much later. But I've been lucky enough to have some amazing young people to work with. And to me, it's huge because it does some of the kinds of things you were talking about. When a child goes through bar or bat mitzvah training, they stand in front of the community, not just the day of the celebration, but for the 6 to 8 months in front of it. They're having increasing opportunities to be in front of the community and to start to come into their own. We've got a young man right now who's not that far away from his celebration. And we've been kind of teasing him because when he first started, he was, you can almost, and now you can actually hear him, and he's, and he's starting to stand up tall, and the posture is improving. And that's really good for me because I'm notoriously not a good stander. My posture's not, as you can tell on the YouTube videos of the radio station call, and even the live on Facebook, you can tell I'm not really always good about sitting up straight or standing up. Well, you can't tell that when I'm standing, but you can definitely tell that I don't sit straight. And so the kids actually remind me to improve my posture, and that's a good thing. But the part that I really like the best is the confidence, the leadership skills that I see the young child maturing into. And it's timed to that time of our lives where you are shifting from that really baby look to starting to look like a young man or a young woman. And I've even had people tell me that they can see the difference actually at the celebration itself, that, a child walks in Friday night and a young adult walks out Saturday.
Good example here.
Yeah.
Aaron's celebration.
Yeah.
Friday night. You sat down,
mm-hmm.
and he's supposed to lead the service. And the first couple times, he kept turning his head and looking back at you.
Mm-hmm.
And you were just like, go ahead.
It's yours.
And he was uncertain.
Yeah.
But half hour later, he was just leading the service. Saturday, wasn't looking back again at you for guidance, and he had that initial trepidation. I can understand the overwhelming sense of nerves and stage fright and fear sometimes. And then when he saw you weren't jumping up there to announce the pages, he just went into what he knew how to do. He was trained.
Yeah, unless they watch somebody else's celebration, they don't get it. Because what I warn them, I say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to smile and have fun.
And that's all you're going to get.
Huh? That's it. That's it. If you really get stuck, you might hear the melody coming at you. But I won't have my mic on. I'll just be sitting, smiling, and you can't wipe that smile off my face. I won't let somebody stand up there unless they're going to be able to get to some minimum level. Have I had some that have really tested that? Yes, there have been the few that really want to see how low they can take that bar. But I set the bar pretty high. And, I can't force a child to study. I can't force them. We're at the stage now, the young gentleman that I just mentioned whose celebration is coming up, I must have been 4 or 5 months ago when I said to him, I said, look, I've taught you the skills. You have them. You simply now need to practice and apply them and continue practicing and applying and practicing and applying. And I'll listen and I'll see, I'll tell you where the polish is a little bit off, and I'll sharpen and I'll hone that with you so that you're really sounding the best you can be. But I can't make you practice. I can't make you spend the time to get fluid with the words. And please read the English in the prayer book so that you don't stumble on the language of prayer, which is a little bit different from how we speak. Our prayer book uses modern English in its prayers. It's not, ye shall or anything like that, but it's still different, and it's different vocabulary. Most kids don't get words like repentance and things like that in grade school. I guess they're, at 13, they're in 7th grade usually. So, you're going to see a 7th grade vocabulary, and some of the words in the prayer book are well above that. And so it helps if they've practiced reading it once or twice. And I always chuckle when I find that the English is the piece that the kid can't do, because they don't believe me when I say, you need to read your part in the English prayer, 7 to 10 times in the week before the celebration. You need to read it before that so you can find the trippy parts, because they're there. And but yeah, it's kind of interesting. But I really do. I watch this small child, because they're always, and I tease them. I say, you're shorter than me when you start, and you can have your celebration when you reach my height. And it's about right, yeah. And usually I'm like, okay, And I did have one young man in Tucson who, about 2/3 of the way through the service, just put his hand on the podium and said, "So far, so good." And yeah, that was now some of the students in Tucson had a little bit more to do than we do, because we had a musical director. And so they had to, and the choir came and supported them. So the choir did, a lot of the congregation response support kind of thing. So they knew that they'd always have a really strong congregational response. But in order to do that, they had to come and practice with the choir, a number of times until they got the cueing right. And they'd had to practice with the musical director. She was also our pianist. And they had to learn, how much music is there to lead into the prayer, obviously what the melody is for the prayer itself, and then how to finish so that it looks like you know what you're doing. And then that's just part of the process, right? We don't have to do as much of that because we don't have nearly the musical extensions that I had in my congregation in Tucson. So, yeah, but it's different. And does every congregation do that? No, some congregations, they don't even do the Friday night service. I find that, in a way, really helpful for the students. First of all, it gives, depending on the congregation, I jokingly say I've got 2 congregations in one, those who come on Friday night and those who come on Saturday morning. And there is a difference in, there are some who almost always only come on Friday and some who mostly come on Saturday. So there are 2 very different groups. And the bar mitzvah celebration, if they do Friday night and Saturday, they broach both groups. And I know that not everybody who comes on Friday is going to come on Saturday. So what I typically do on a Friday night is I will have in a Reform congregation, we often do a Torah service as part of a Friday night. And so at a bar mitzvah celebration, we'll do a very short Torah service, just so that those who are just going to be there Friday night have a taste of what the service is going to be like. The young person does not actually get called to Torah, but among my students, most of them are chanting the entire Torah portion for their bar mitzvah, so they'll chant the piece on Friday night, even though somebody else is called to the Torah. And then Saturday morning, of course, they will be chanting it for everybody, and then they themselves will be called for the very first time to Torah. And it's fun to watch, because I make them go as far away from Torah as they can possibly be and still be in the room. So they're off in the corner, and then I tell them, you need to get up here quickly when you're called. And they do, they run. It's part of the fun. And that sticks. Those are memories that get embedded, and I think that makes a huge difference. And so I have had kids that go on to tremendous things in speech and debate, things like that, and things like drama or anything, because they're not afraid of getting in front of a crowd. They've survived that, getting up, and they've realized through their celebration exactly what it means to practice, because they know what pieces they didn't practice enough. They can feel the difference, right? The butterflies come from not practicing enough. Yeah, there are butterflies from just getting up in front, but there's a whole different set of critters in your belly
when you don't know.
When you don't know what you're doing up there, and you realize that, oh my gosh, I can't go back and study. That time has passed, and they survive that. Because everybody's got some rough edge somewhere. I've only ever had one young gentleman who I would say did not have any rough edges. And he was an amazing bar mitzvah celebrant. He was a year older than, because he didn't decide to do it. It's funny, some families leave it up to the child to decide if they want it or not. And this family was one of those that, he didn't, nobody pushed him. However, his mother always said to him, I wished I had had my bat mitzvah celebration. I wished I'd had it. I've regretted not having it all of my adult life. I've regretted not doing that. And at 14, he said, so actually he was 2 years older by the time he got there. Just before his 14th birthday, he said, I don't want to grow up and regret not doing this. So, yeah, if we can arrange it, I want to do it. And so they came into the community. And the interesting part about that was after he had completed his studies and did his celebration, his mom then went and did an adult version. So that's pretty cool. I love when parents who have not had a chance in their youth to do it, because it was more it certainly was more discouraged for women certainly 2 generations ago, but 1 generation ago. And not even all guys have gone through a celebration. And for some, it was not, I would say it was not as big a deal. Unfortunately, some years ago, when it became, one of the things that happened in Judaism, which is associated with the Benderly Boys up in, which is the group that ran the Jewish education up in the New York area, they were more interested in all of this wave of immigration that came from World War II and trying to help all of these new Americans fit in. And so the goal was almost to make the bar mitzvah celebration something very different from what it had been. And they pushed and they shoved and they tried to force it into the congregations. They tried to force the congregations not to officiate if somebody wasn't a member, and the congregations glommed onto the idea that, well, that's a good way to force people to be members for at least a year. And if we put enough kids through, then we've always got this steady river going. And the downside of that became the teachers were not ready to put in the kind of time that I think a bar bat mitzvah celebration requires. And if the teacher's not willing to put in that kind of time, then you get shortcuts like, here's a tape, go learn it. And so there's a whole generation that learned their Torah portion not by learning the skills to chant it, but by memorizing a tape. But first it was a record, and then it was a tape, and then it became a CD, and now it's a thumb drive.
All right, well, I have noticed in all the temples I've belonged to since I was a kid, I don't know how prevalent this is, but you do it differently. I mean, I performed the entire Saturday service. I don't think I had Friday. I did everything except call the pages.
Okay.
All right. I was trained with a tape for the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
I was trained to memorize it, which, was hard enough, but I did it. I never since then, until you, have seen any bar mitzvah any really remotely similar to my own, where the B'nai Mitzvah was actually performing most of the service. I've seen a couple prayers, a Torah portion, and that's the bar mitzvah. That's what I've always seen. Not only in our temple, and I guess in the temples you were beforehand, not only do they perform the entire service, but obviously the way you force them to learn Torah is different. It's not just that they don't get a tape to memorize. They have to learn the chant, the melody. They have to learn to read the Hebrew without the vowels, which is what it is in the Torah. They have to learn to recognize what those words are without those vowels, and to be able to do the chant looking at those words, not from memory. And if they're going to translate it into English, they don't do that from memory either. They have to learn to look at these Hebrew words in a Torah without vowels.
So you're really making them learn it.
Yeah.
And be able to read it in English.
Well, they have to be able to do a translation. Yeah.
And so those are amazing skills. And the fact is, once you actually are able to do it, and you go through the celebration, I don't know how they feel. I just, from my perspective, I just think that's an extraordinary accomplishment to not only be able to chant it looking at the words and not having a tape.
Especially at 12.
But translating a foreign language into English, looking at the words, not memorizing them.
Yeah, and they've got to apply melody because they sing the English. So they're looking at the Hebrew, which doesn't have the vowels and it doesn't have the notes, and they're translating it. Now they can't speak Hebrew. That would take a whole lot longer than what I've done with them. They learn the limited vocabulary of their Torah portion, and they learn enough of the grammar to be able to function in their Torah portion. And that's, this tiny subset of Hebrew. But they're using that subset when they're looking at the Hebrew letters, excuse me, in Torah, and they're doing a spontaneous translation and singing.
Spontaneous translation has to be difficult.
It's a difficult skill. It really is. It's an amazing skill.
But it's an important one because it teaches them to think on a different level. Excuse me. Apologize for that. The joy of the frog living in the throat. But I've never had a child yet die from it. I've had a few.
They could do it then.
Yeah.
In other words,
Yeah,
they can do it.
They can do it, and I've had one or two kids get really teary at the stress, and I monitor that very carefully. I don't want to push them over, but I will take them to the edge with it. The mothers and fathers not necessarily, because they don't confide in me and they don't. So sometimes they get really stressed. I've joked with a few parents that we're going to give out T-shirts that said, "I survived my child's B'nai Mitzvah training with Rabbi Loeb," and I'm not alone. I used to think that I was, and at a couple of rabbis' conferences, we were talking with other congregational rabbis, and I found that what I do is not all that uncommon in renewal congregations. So, because renewal really stresses getting close and comfortable with the text and really rooting that Hebrew knowledge. So, yeah, I found that some congregations actually had it, tabulated. You must have at least X number of verses in your bar mitzvah portion. You can go higher, or bar bat mitzvah, and but you can't go lower. And now that doesn't mean that if somebody, says somebody is learning disabled and really needs a specially tailored celebration, then we'll do that. You're not going to push a child beyond what's reasonable for them, but you are going to push them. The point of a bar or a bat mitzvah celebration is not that you just get up and you play a violin if that's what you do, and that's easy, and yeah, it's cute to show that to people. Because if you don't push toward the edge, you don't discover that you can move it, which is a big part of what I'm trying to teach them. You can move it if you're intentional about it and you practice and you work. You can push your limits, and you can do much more than you think you can, and you can do it well. And that's, to me, the lesson behind the bar bat mitzvah celebration. Here's taking a teenager, a prepubescent child who's going to become a teenager. Right? They're going to become a teenager in the process of going through this rite of passage, and say to them, you have more control on how well you live your life, how well you do the work you do, by how much you apply yourself. That's one of, to me, the big lessons. And if all they do is get up and do something they always do, then they're not going to be doing that. Now, that's not to say if I've got, and I've done it, if I've got a bugle player and they do a really nice job of playing a bugle, and if they want to incorporate playing a bugle into their service, that's fine. Either in the service or in, I've had some do it Saturday night at the celebration. You put a special piece in where they can demonstrate secular skills because, that is part of the child. And it's part of what they do. And hopefully they do something special that, again, is a little bit of a push. I'm not talking about pushing you over the edge of a cliff, but I'm talking about, getting you to the next level on the mountain. Because that's going to impart so many additional skills. So, that being said, I will also say that it's always been my policy that each child needs a specially tailored program for them, because no two children are alike. They're just not. And, what's a push for one is not a push for another. Different things, different kids. And to me, in a lot of ways, the hardest thing is when I've got two or three together for whatever reason. I had a pair of twins. When I first moved to Port St. Lucie, I had a pair of twins, and they had very, very, very different learning styles. Incredibly so. And the one that everybody was convinced, the one twin that everybody was like, oh, they'll never get there, did a spectacular job. And the one that was going to be easy kind of coasted, and it showed. Not that they did a poor job, but they were outshined by their twin. And
built-in competition, though.
Yeah, built-in competition.
With twins, yeah.
It is, and that's rough. But that was a function of learning styles for, what's easy what's easy for one is not for the other. And so the one who got into the habit of working hard, worked hard. And we see that. I see that in college in the students who know how to study and do their work, and they're diligent. They might not be the greatest natural aptitude, but because they've got the tenacity and the work ethic and the work habit, they do very well. And whereas the one who skated through school because they were bright and didn't have to do the work is usually in deep trouble. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, everybody's a little bit different. So we tailor what we do. So that seems like a good place to say, if you've got a 10 to 12-year-old or 13-year-old or even a 15-year-old who might be interested in bar bat mitzvah training, please give us a call. Check it out. You can give me a call. You can call the station and talk to us here. That's 772-340-1590, or you can call me on my cell phone. It's 520-247-4741, or you can call the temple, and that's 772. And then I'm going to fade. It's on the website. I don't call it. I answer it. I don't call it.
There you go.
So, yeah, it's on the screen. Thank you. It'll be on the screen when you look on the YouTube. And please do connect with us. We'd love to talk with you and see if it's a good fit for you and your child. Because it does need to be, to me, it needs to be tailored, and it needs to really internally make the child shine. Not just outside, but inside. And somebody here is putting tenachi and tenacity, yes, the ability to really stick with it. And that's part of it. And they learn a couple of other skills. They learn first of all, they learn a really important lesson, which is that there's more than one translation of scriptures. And that's so critical. Because, I'll give them the vocabulary, and then the first thing everyone does is they try to do a word-for-word translation. Well, that doesn't work. It's not English when you do a word-for-word translation of Hebrew, right? He's giving me the phone number of the temple. Thank you, Cliff. Okay, that is 772-934. I got that part right. 4110. You'd think I'd remember 4110. So please do give the temple a call, 772-934-4110, and you can talk to us there about bar bat mitzvah training for your child. Thank you, Cliff.
That was your business card?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My business card, yeah. Well, there's a good reason for having them around. And you also can check it out on the website. And so, those I think are important, and let's talk and let's meet. And we are going to be doing an Intro to Judaism course here coming up pretty soon. Watch for some more information on that. Other exciting things that we've got going at the temple. We've got Purim coming up in March. And then in April, we've got our inaugural Treasure Caost Art and Craft Festival. And that'll be at the community center on April 14th. That's a Sunday. I hope that's a Sunday, April 14th. And then the following Friday and Saturday are the first and second night of Pesach, Passover, and we will be having a community Seder open to anyone who'd like to join us. Information on those two items will be on the website no later than Monday. So I don't think either one's up there yet, but they're en route. They're en route on the website. So information on both of those. And for the craft show and the art show, if you're an artist or a crafter, two separate parts to the show, then please start looking for vendor applications. And for everybody else, it's free admission, and that is 10 to 4. So please do join us at the Community Center in Port St. Lucie on Oroso Boulevard. And, some good things. I've been talking to crafters and artists already, and some exciting things are coming into that festival.
Food vendors too.
Hot popcorn. Get your hot popcorn.
Okay. All right.
Are you selling popcorn?
I make the I have the popcorn machine.
Okay.
I pop it. I bag it. I give it.
There you go. So we're expecting food vendors as well.
At least popcorn.
Yes, there definitely will be popcorn, but there should be other vendors there as well. So as we get those contracts, right? As we get those contracts in, then we'll start to post who's going to be a vendor at the show. And I think it's going to be exciting. We don't have enough art and craft venue in Port St. Lucie. Now, on the Treasure Coast in general, there's more, because Stuart tends to run some art shows.
Oh, yeah, Sebastian Vero Beach.
Yeah, but there's not a whole lot in Port St. Lucie itself.
And then there's a big one in Hope Sound, right? Isn't there like a really big?
Yeah, it's like north and south. There's a lot. So we're going to just bring the dumbbell a little more and put some focus into Port St. Lucie. So that hopefully should be some centered things for the Treasure Coast. And those are exciting things coming up.
Very good. It's going to be a lot of fun at the Arts Festival.
I think it will be.
I love art. Usually I buy art. Statue here, photograph there, painting.
There you go. And some nice Judaica. I know that'll be there.
Oh, gosh, I won't be able to resist.
All different kinds of things. So, and you can come and check out the temple table and find out a little bit about Congregation Eitz Chaim and the exciting things that we've got planned coming up. It's going to be an exciting year for our congregation. The more I see of what's being planned, the more excited I get, because we've really started to do some things that just are going to really put us on the map. And our members are excited, and that's always a good thing when people are reaching out and doing things in the larger community as well. So those are some of the important things coming up. All right. Any questions? Anybody would like to call in with a question for this rabbi at 772-340-1590? And somebody here put a comment, varying translations are so important. Put two Jews together and they form 5 political parties. There you go. There's the political swing. Thank you, Al. But, that is part of the reason for some of the discussion, is that when you translate things, they don't always stay the same. I was discussing that with my psychology class at IRSC. We were talking about language and how it works in forming thought, and which causes which. Does the language cause thought, or does thought cause language? And we got into a discussion of being bilingual, and somebody had commented that somebody who didn't speak Spanish was trying to write out some instructions on a farm for workers who were English speakers, and then a parallel set of instructions in Spanish, and was using Google Translate.
Yeah.
And for all of the Spanish speakers on the line, basically the instructions told them to put all of the animals in la pluma, which is a pen, but it's not the wire pen. It's the writing pen.
Oh, wrong pen.
Wrong pen.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's the kind of thing. Right, there's 2 different words in Spanish, but pen has
we
two
run
meanings.
into that here because, of course, our sister station WJNX, we do commercials, in English and Spanish, and we will take the English commercial and translate it, and you may have a 30-second commercial in English. It is much longer in Spanish. And if you do use the Google, you always have to run it by a natural Spanish-speaking member of the staff because it's totally different.
Yeah.
It's not quite right.
Yeah.
It's close, but not quite right.
Yeah. It gets the idea, but, not without the chickles and the giggles. And it's from things like that. You don't put the animals in the big pen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always like to tell when people say to me, well, there's a wonder. It's like, oh, yeah, translate Bill is a sharp guy.
No, because there's not. Sharp means
so many things.
Like a knife.
And you're exactly right, Al. Al's naming the hypothesis about whether or not thought forms language or language forms thought. And that's exactly it, the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis. Thank you. It's nice to know that folks know those that lingo from the class. So so that's a little bit, right, when getting back to the B'nai Mitzvah, they are having to expand their language skills, not just in as far as translating their little portion, but they're learning that there isn't a one-to-one mapping between the two languages, especially Hebrew to English, because Hebrew presumes the verb to be. So there is no, in the present tense, there's past tense and there's future tense to be. There is a word for to be in Hebrew, but it's not used in 99% of the cases, unless you were just going to say he exists, then you'd use it. But if you're going to say the table of the book is on the table, if we were to do that in Hebrew, it would be the book on the table. Right. In English, that wouldn't be a good sentence because it doesn't have a verb. And in Hebrew, the verb is understood. So that's syntax and sentence structure, so that's even so different. Somebody's here saying a couple of paragraphs to translate something, and that's not uncommon, that you've got to work around something. So I've got to give my hat to anybody like the UN translators who sit there and try to translate on the spot, because it's just, and I'm trilingual, but to do an instantaneous of what somebody else is saying,
right?
Because then you've got to try to figure out what they're thinking along with what you're translating, because otherwise you're gonna end up putting the animals in the big
wrong
pen.
pen. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the fun parts. So I think that it's important that kids get that, because then they become less rigid in how they deal with others and with their language. So that's a byproduct of it. So the amount of learning that goes on alongside, it's not just about the Hebrew and the text. It's about the life skills. It's about how do I stand? How do I talk? How do I think? Because I'm always asking the kids, what does that prayer mean that you just said? Well, that's not good enough. You can't stand up in front of people and say something unless you know what you're saying. And the first 2 or 3 times I get this really strange look from
But
the
because
preteen.
they're thinking, I'm just reading this.
Yeah, I'm just
to
reading
you.
this. Yeah. I don't have to think about what it means. It's like, yeah, you do. Really do. If I had thought about it, I probably wouldn't have walked through high school singing things like "Strangers in the Night."
Oh, I did that in D.C.
Yeah. And then some years later, I actually listened to the words of that song and went, oh, no wonder my parents wondered why I was singing it. Yeah. Because they paid attention to the words. Even if I didn't, I was just...
It was a song.
It was a song,
Yeah,
and
no,
it was
but
syllables.
that's how it is, though, with kids.
Yeah.
They hear songs, and then later on you go, ooh,
Yeah.
when you finally figure out what was going on there.
Yeah. It's... the other exercise I like doing like that is actually having the kids write out the Pledge of Allegiance. Cartoons too. Yeah. Lots of things. And so there's all kinds of things that play into it. And there's grammar rules, there's structure, somebody put intonations and kinesiology and all of that. That goes into it too. it's such a phenomenal experience that I wish more people actually did it. I wish the whole world went through something like that. But then, I'm kind of a weirdo too, because I think that people should have to go through basic training. But because that.
Bite your tongue.
No, seriously, it teaches a different kind of way of thinking and problem solving. Yeah. It also teaches a different kind of teamwork than a lot of people get exposed to. It's another case of where you're pushed to a limit, right? They've got what
you mean basic training like
military?
Air Force?
Yeah,
okay,
like Air Force. Yeah, well, that's because I did Air Force. Yeah,
but you did basic training a long time ago, right?
That would be true.
A galaxy far, far away.
Back when the dinosaurs were.
We're Air Force too in our family, and that was a long time ago. And we had recently, well, not like within the past 10 years, but way after we left the Air Force, visited the base. And it was completely different.
Yeah, well, they've got air conditioning.
That and there was, well, they didn't have that then either. Yeah, but there's a lot of, none of the scumbag stuff, none of this, I mean, that has been.
Yeah. Well, and I don't
completely changed.
I don't know that part's wrong, but they still push you and they still teach you a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right. The part. We were
just the one for all instead of just me kind of camaraderie is.
And here's the real learning, right? That if I'm marching, I can go 7 times farther than I thought I could walking. Right? So, we used to march from one end of the base to the other.
You marched everywhere you went.
Well, you marched everywhere you, yeah. And you didn't think about it because you formed up in the line and you just, whoever was leading it, you just, unless you were one of the leaders, you didn't really worry about where you were going. You just watched the person in front of you. And then when
you were all by height, right?
Well, yeah, however we were arranged. Yep. It varied depending on what was going on. But you got to the far end of the base, and you went, oh, my gosh, we just walked 3 miles. Yeah. And I didn't even pay attention to, I'm not dying, right? I'm not dying from that physical expenditure, and then if you broke up and you got to walk back to, oh my gosh, it was so far back to the barracks. But if you marched, you got there.
But didn't they make you run?
There's a little running too.
There's a little bit of running, but not as much as you might think. Most of it's just marching.
Double time?
No, just a basic march step.
But you go everywhere as a unit, as a marching unit. It's time to go eat. You march to the chow hall. Yeah. And it's
and you get there, and you get there fast. Yeah. Now, granted, I'm short, right? I'm really short, and a 36-inch stride is not at the low end of my stride, right?
But see, the taller people compensated the length of their step in order to walk marching as a unit. Yeah. So it all kind of comes together.
Well, they very often put me in the front of the flight so that the tall guys didn't leave me in the bushes. We were a co-ed group, and so marching for the tall guys was short stuff here really was a control factor. But I also learned to stretch out and move faster, and that probably was very healthy for me. And
I wouldn't have survived.
You'd be surprised.
I thought about the JAG Corps.
They don't give you any time to think about it. You're always busy.
I thought about the JAG Corps my 3rd year of law school, and I interviewed with all the services, and all the services except for the Marines. I would have gone in as a first lieutenant.
Yeah.
No basic training. That was pretty cool. I figured I'd get immediate courtroom experience. The Marines, I go in as a captain. Basic training like everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I wasn't.
And the Marines train different than the Air Force.
I wasn't going to survive it. Number one, and number two, I realized if my commanding officer in a case gave me an order to do something I thought was wrong, I'd be spending my whole time there in a jail because I wouldn't obey the order. It wasn't for me.
You don't obey an order that you believe to be illegal or wrong.
Yeah, and you risk going to jail.
I have stood up. When I was a first lieutenant, I stood up to a bird colonel and said, "No, sir. No way am I going to allow you to do what you want to do." Because I was the officer of the day, and it must have been an hour that we spent in the Sky Cops office with the reg open and my saying, it says right here, blah, 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 blah. No, you may not put the ammunition and the weapons on a state highway to go from our base, which had the range was under construction. And so they'd made arrangements with the local police department to use their firing range to qualify for that quarter until the range on base got finished. And this bird colonel wanted to use one truck to put the weapons and the ammo. It's like, you're not leaving the base with one vehicle having both guns and ammo.
And what if that bird colonel told me he wants me to use this theory to prosecute this case, and I thought the other theory was the better theory?
What do you do if you're working somewhere and your boss says that, you know?
You're not risking a court-martial.
You're not risking a court-martial in the military either. You know, you're probably at greater risk of getting fired from the law firm than you are getting a court-martial for just a difference in opinion. But, you know, so there was a case of, you know, I was a first lieutenant, and this bird colonel was just obnoxious. And the sergeant in the Sky Cop office was, like, beside himself watching me say no to him. And, you know, and did it go up to the general on the base? Yes, it did. And the general said to me when I walked in, he said, okay, what's the reg number? And I gave him the reg number. And he said, okay. And that was it. You know, so there was no, you know, it was behind. I had done my homework. Actually, the Sky Cop had done the homework for me. He's the one who looked up the reg. You know, and he had the reg book open. And that's why I got called in the first place, was because the Sky Cops had actually stopped them at the gate. And that's when the colonel said, well, you know, and the sergeant said, no, I've got to get the officer of the day's permission to let you pass. And he called me in and he explained it to me, and the bird colonel screamed and yelled. And I looked at the reg. I took a few minutes and read the reg and said, you know, it's clear. It says you may not leave the base in a vehicle that doesn't comply with the state regulations on the highways on which you're going to be traveling. That's and it's even an Air Force regulation. You don't go on the open road, because the one time somebody did have that, and a group got on the back of a pickup truck and loaded the weapons. It's not that difficult if they're co-located, but if you're two vehicles, it's a little more difficult to commandeer two vehicles and then sit around and load the weapons and use them against the military. Plus, obviously, and
regulations are regulations.
And they are regulations, yeah. Well, you know, and the weapons are in their lock cases, and the ammo's in its lock case, so it's not like they're not just bouncing around in the vehicles. And this was just a case of, you know, they were going to take a dozen men over to the range, and they figured they'd load them in a bus or a van, and they'd throw the ammo and the weapons in one pickup truck.
Who would know the difference?
And who would know the difference, right? Because they were leaving early on a weekend morning. You know, but I was the officer of the day. So that's been Ask a Rabbi, something totally different. See you next week. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Ask a Rabbi.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.